The Titan's Edge Military Academy hung in the Helix Nebula like a particularly aggressive piece of architectural malice, its obsidian surfaces gleaming with the kind of menace that made passing merchant vessels take sudden detours through asteroid fields. This wasn't your garden-variety educational institution where young beings learned to calculate hyperspace coordinates and write strongly worded diplomatic protests. No, this was where the galaxy's most promising killers came to perfect their craft, under the supervision of beings who considered excessive force a polite suggestion rather than a legal limitation. Chief Drill Commander Kexnal surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of someone who had spent 3 centuries turning promising young psychopaths into highly efficient instruments of interstellar warfare. The Krathian stood 8 feet of biometallic nightmare, his exoskeleton bristling with neural interface ports that allowed direct connection to the Academy's weapon systems. His species had evolved in the radioactive cores of dead stars, which explained both their charming personality and their tendency to solve problems through controlled nuclear fusion. Another cycle, another batch of privileged spawn, pretending they understand warfare. He growled, his voice carrying harmonics that made nearby equipment spontaneously develop structural fractures. The Academy attracted the usual collection of galactic elite, furnace-born cadets who could manipulate plasma at the molecular level, void walkers, whose mastery of dimensional mechanics allowed them to exist in several realities simultaneously, and psi-wraiths, who treated the fabric of spacetime like a particularly entertaining puzzle. But today's roster included something that made even Kexnal's permanently scowling expression develop additional layers of disapproval. A human from Earth. That insignificant blue marble inhabited by creatures so pathetically under-evolved they still required atmospheric pressure to prevent their internal fluids from boiling in vacuum. The human in question stood in the Academy's intake processing center, radiating the kind of calm that made seasoned instructors check their sidearms. Riley Voss appeared deceptively ordinary. Average height for her species, lean build that suggested endurance over raw power, and dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, while revealing absolutely nothing about her internal thought processes. Her auburn hair was regulation length, her posture indicated military training, and her expression held the neutral alertness of someone accustomed to being underestimated. Exchange program participant. Kexnal's question carried the incredulous tone typically reserved for discovering that someone had attempted to use a plasma torch as a backscratcher. According to my assignment papers, Riley confirmed, her voice carrying the flat professionalism that made career military personnel everywhere slightly nervous. Around them, other incoming cadets whispered in 23 different languages, all essentially asking the same question. What was a biologically unenhanced primitive doing in an academy designed for beings with actual supernatural capabilities? Zektor, a furnace-born whose species had mastered stellar manipulation before humans discovered fire, literally glowed with barely contained plasma energy. Beside him, Velnara phased between dimensions, with the casual ease of someone changing clothes, her void walker physiology allowing her to exist as both particle and wave simultaneously. Humans possess no documented paranormal abilities, Kexnal stated, consulting his datapad with the thoroughness of someone cataloging extinct species. No energy projection, no dimensional manipulation, no enhanced physical parameters beyond baseline mammalian specifications. Your military records indicate reliance on primitive kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, and what can only be described as aggressively applied physics. That sounds accurate, Riley agreed, apparently unfazed by being described like a malfunctioning piece of agricultural equipment. The Academy's placement algorithms, designed by beings who measured combat potential in terms of measurable psychic output and supernatural ability indices, promptly classified her as remedial tier and assigned her to the Special Accommodation Division. This was the Academy's polite term for the academic equivalent of a cosmic joke, where species with culturally significant but tactically irrelevant abilities learned basic combat theory, while their more gifted peers practiced techniques that could reshape local stellar geography. Kexnal took considerable pride in operating what he considered a progressive institution. The Academy's founding charter, etched into the station's hull in 62 languages, using controlled antimatter burns, declared excellence through superior destruction. More practically, this meant every species got to showcase their evolutionary advantages while learning to kill efficiently within carefully established parameters that prevented accidental system-wide extinction events during training exercises. The rules were elegantly simple. No abilities that might destabilize local spacetime, no techniques requiring the consumption of sentient beings for power sources, and absolutely no methods that could trigger spontaneous stellar collapse. Beyond these minor restrictions, cadets were enthusiastically encouraged to demonstrate their species' natural gifts while mastering the fine art of controlled violence. Which brought them to what Checksnall was beginning to think of as the human problem. Your species' tactical documentation, he continued, his biometallic mandibles clicking in patterns that indicated deep philosophical confusion, suggests extensive reliance on projectile-based weapon systems, chemical reaction explosives, and what appears to be remarkably creative applications of basic physics principles. No supernatural capabilities documented. We tend to work with what we've got, Riley acknowledged. What you've got, Zektor interjected, his plasma-wreathed form pulsing with condescending amusement, his soft tissue, brittle bones, and atmospheric dependency. It's like watching a particularly determined microorganism attempt stellar engineering. Velnara's multidimensional laughter created harmonics across several parallel realities, generating sound frequencies that technically didn't exist in baseline spacetime. Perhaps the human can demonstrate her species' legendary ability to metabolize oxygen without technological assistance. The assembled cadets' amusement created a cacophony that would have sent xenobiologists into raptures of academic ecstasy. Harmonized chittering, telepathic giggling, dimensional resonance that sounded like whale songs played through a malfunctioning quantum processor, and something that resembled the death screams of violins being fed into industrial shredders. Riley's expression remained unchanged, though something subtle shifted in her body language that would have been invisible to most observers. Checksnall, however, had spent centuries studying micro-expressions across hundreds of species as part of his advanced interrogation training. For just a moment, the human had looked less like a confused primitive and more like an apex predator, calculating optimal approach vectors while determining which target would provide the most educational dismemberment experience. Training commences at next cycle, he announced, dismissing the thought as instructor paranoia brought on by too many years of dealing with beings whose idea of conflict resolution involved creative applications of stellar manipulation. All cadets will demonstrate basic combat proficiency, utilizing their natural abilities within Academy safety parameters. The Titan's Edge Military Academy's training facilities occupied 47 levels of the station, each environment specifically designed to accommodate the diverse physiological and supernatural requirements of its student body, atmospheric composition, gravitational fields, and local physical laws could be adjusted to suit everything from methane-breathing crystalline entities to energy beings who existed primarily as sentient electromagnetic radiation. Riley found herself assigned to Training Sector 12, unofficially designated the accommodation wing where species, with limited tactical applications, learned fundamental combat theory. Her fellow remedials included a phase shifter, whose ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously came with the unfortunate side effect of randomly dispersing across parallel universes, and a collective intelligence whose individual components spent most of their time engaged in heated philosophical debates about the ethics of violence. Today we focus on basic tactical positioning, announced Secondary Instructor Krex, a reptilian biped whose species had evolved from something resembling an unusually aggressive crocodile, with delusions of intellectual grandeur. Remember, effective combat maximizes your natural advantages while minimizing exploitable vulnerabilities. The lesson began with elementary positioning exercises. The phase shifter attempted to demonstrate multi-dimensional flanking maneuvers and promptly scattered across 17 parallel realities, requiring emergency reconstitution protocols that involved mathematics most beings preferred not to contemplate. The collective intelligence spent 45 minutes debating whether aggressive positioning constituted a violation of their species' nonviolence principles before reluctantly agreeing to disagree with themselves. Riley, meanwhile, moved through the exercises with mechanical precision that impressed even Krex. Her footwork demonstrated intuitive understanding of optimal angles and distance management across multiple species attack ranges. Her defensive positioning suggested comprehensive knowledge of anatomical weak points and biomechanical limitations that spanned dozens of different physiological configurations. Most intriguingly, her practice strikes consistently targeted locations that would cause maximum incapacitation with minimal energy expenditure. Efficient technique, Krex observed with something approaching professional respect. Very, and economical. Humans prefer optimization, Riley replied. Meanwhile, in the advanced training sectors, Zektor was providing textbook demonstrations of why the Furnace-born were considered the galaxy's premier plasma warriors. His molecular-level energy manipulation could transform atmospheric gases into superheated weapons, while simultaneously generating localized fusion reactions that served as both offensive capabilities and intimidation displays. During combat simulations, he defeated opponents by converting the environment itself into hostile plasma fields. Velnara's dimensional manipulation proved equally impressive. She could create weapons from crystallized spacetime, phase through solid matter, while maintaining enough coherence to deliver devastating attacks and generate localized reality distortions that sent opponents tumbling through impossible geometric configurations. Her combat style resembled a particularly violent form of performance art crossed with advanced theoretical physics. Acceptable demonstration, Keksnall noted, monitoring the advanced cadets through the Academy's comprehensive surveillance systems. Both candidates show appropriate restraint while showcasing species-typical advantages. The Academy's educational philosophy emphasized controlled application of supernatural abilities. Raw power without discipline was merely destructive chaos, and discipline required understanding limitations. Every species possessed evolutionary advantages, but those advantages needed refinement to become truly effective in galactic standard warfare scenarios, which made the reports filtering up from Training Sector 12 increasingly puzzling. The human, Krex reported during the daily instructor briefing, is demonstrating remarkable adaptability to multi-species combat scenarios. Adaptability. Keksnall's biometallic mandibles clicked in patterns that suggested skeptical interest rather than outright dismissal. She's been analyzing our other cadets, Krex explained. Not just their combat techniques, but their physiological responses, micro-expressions, breathing patterns, involuntary muscle contractions. Yesterday, she accurately predicted a Thrakari phase shift 4 seconds before execution. Humans possess no documented precognitive capabilities. No, Krex agreed. But they appear to possess exceptionally developed pattern recognition systems. She's reading opponents like technical specification manuals. Keksnall accessed the training sector recordings, reviewing Riley's performance with the analytical thoroughness that had made him the Academy's most feared combat evaluation specialist. The human moved with economic efficiency, demonstrating none of the spectacular supernatural displays typical of other species. Instead, she showed an almost mechanical understanding of leverage principles, momentum transfer, and cross-species anatomical vulnerabilities that bordered on the disturbing. In one recorded sparring session, she faced a granite hide whose species possessed naturally armored exoskeletons and enhanced strength capabilities that could crush most materials. Rather than attempting to match the opponent's superior physical capabilities, she identified a specific weakness in the alien's carapace joint configuration and delivered a precisely calculated strike that exploited structural engineering principles most species would never notice. The impact appeared almost casual, but biomechanical analysis revealed force vectors that turned the opponent's own defensive advantages into liability factors. She's learning, Keksnall realized with growing unease. Every encounter provides additional data about alien physiology and combat psychology. Should we implement enhanced monitoring protocols? Krex asked. Before Kexnall could formulate a response, emergency alarms began echoing through the training facility. In Sector 7, a combat simulation had experienced catastrophic system failure, trapping several advanced cadets under collapsed training infrastructure. Emergency response teams were mobilizing, but the debris configuration made standard extraction procedures problematic without risking additional structural collapse. Riley appeared in the emergency response corridor before most instructors had finished processing the incident reports. "I can assist," she offered with the calm professionalism of someone volunteering to recalibrate routine equipment rather than coordinate a complex rescue operation involving potential casualties. "This requires coordinated supernatural manipulation," Kexnall explained with automatic dismissal. "The structural collapse pattern is too complex for manual intervention without risking." She was already moving. What happened next would be studied in Academy tactical databases for generations. Riley assessed the debris configuration, identified critical stress points and support vectors, then began systematically removing obstacles in a sequence that prevented secondary collapses while creating viable extraction corridors. Her movements displayed understanding of structural engineering principles that rivaled computer modeling systems. More remarkably, she coordinated with responding cadets by treating their supernatural abilities as tools in her rescue strategy rather than incomprehensible phenomena to be avoided. She directed Zektor's plasma manipulation to specific support points while guiding Velnara's dimensional phasing to create temporary structural bracing. Within minutes, she had organized a multi-species rescue operation that functioned like precision clockwork. "How did you know?" Kexnall demanded after the last victim was successfully extracted and transferred to medical facilities. "The structural analysis calculations, the coordination protocols, the species-specific ability integration strategies." Riley cleaned debris dust from her uniform with the casual efficiency of someone who had just completed routine maintenance rather than orchestrating a complex emergency response that had saved multiple lives. "Humans excel at systems analysis." "Systems analysis. We recognize patterns," she explained. "How different components interact, what happens when you modify specific variables, how to optimize overall system performance. Your species manipulates plasma, theirs controls dimensional mechanics, others phase through solid matter. But they're all just different approaches to solving the same fundamental problems." Kexnall stared at her with the dawning realization that the Academy's evaluation protocols might have catastrophically misunderstood something fundamental about human cognitive capabilities. Training intensified as the academic cycle progressed toward the Crimson Trials, the Academy's final combat assessment system. The evaluation protocol required each cadet to demonstrate mastery of their species' combat specializations while operating within galactic engagement parameters. It functioned as part examination, part tournament, and part carefully orchestrated blood sport designed to identify the most promising candidates for advanced military positions. Zektor prepared by refining his plasma manipulation techniques, learning to generate fusion reactions with surgical precision while maintaining the thermal discipline required to avoid accidentally sterilizing the immediate environment. Velnara practiced manipulating dimensional mechanics in increasingly complex patterns, creating weapons and defenses that existed in the spaces between conventional reality. Riley, meanwhile, continued her methodical analysis of alien physiology and combat psychology. She studied recordings of previous tournaments, memorized anatomical diagrams for 37 species, and practiced movement sequences that appeared deceptively simple but demonstrated increasingly sophisticated understanding of biomechanical optimization principles. "The human concerns me," Kexnall admitted to the Academy's senior command staff during their pre-assessment strategic briefing. "Her combat methodology defies standard classification parameters." "Defies how?" asked Dean Constructor Nexythe, whose crystalline matrix contained the combined tactical analysis capabilities of 47 different military intelligence personalities. "She approaches combat like she's solving engineering problems," Kexnall explained. Every movement serves multiple strategic purposes. Every technique builds upon previous observational data. It's not supernatural ability, it's systematic optimization carried to logical extremes. And this concerns you because? Kexnal's mandibles clicked in patterns that indicated deep existential unease. Because optimization implies someone is working toward maximum efficiency parameters. And I'm beginning to suspect we fundamentally misunderstand what maximum efficiency means when applied to her species' capabilities. The Crimson Trials commenced with traditional ceremony and ritualistic intimidation displays. Representatives from major galactic military powers, observed as cadets, demonstrated the combat techniques that had shaped interstellar warfare for millennia. The Furnace-born exhibited plasma manipulation capabilities that had ended two major conflicts through sheer destructive superiority. Void Walker dimensional control created displays of reality manipulation that served as both artistic expression and psychological warfare. Riley's preliminary matches attracted skeptical attention from observers expecting primitive demonstrations of kinetic force application. Instead, they witnessed something that resisted easy categorization. Her fighting style incorporated elements borrowed from every species she had encountered, adapted, and refined into something uniquely efficient. Against a Thrakari phase manipulator, she anticipated dimensional transitions with timing that approached precognitive accuracy. Against a Krathian like Kexanal, she exploited joint articulation patterns and structural vulnerabilities that most beings would never recognize. Each victory appeared effortless, almost casual, but detailed analysis revealed tactical sophistication that impressed even senior command personnel. She's not just learning combat techniques, observed strategic analysis specialist Vexmore. She's understanding the fundamental principles that make each species' abilities effective, then developing systematic countermeasures. Countermeasures? Dean Constructor Nexith's crystalline form pulsed with alarmed interest. Observe her positioning against the energy manipulator. She's not avoiding the attacks, she's maneuvering into locations where energy projection becomes geometrically disadvantageous due to environmental factors. It's like she's treating their supernatural abilities as physics problems with exploitable solutions. As Riley progressed through the elimination brackets, her matches began attracting larger audiences and increasingly nervous commentary from Academy officials. Word spread throughout the station that something unprecedented was occurring in the tournament structure. The human who was supposed to provide baseline demonstration of primitive combat techniques was instead dissecting opponents with clinical precision that bordered on the disturbing. Her semi-final match against Velnara provided the first clear indication that something extraordinary and potentially problematic was developing. The Void Walker entered the arena with confidence derived from dimensional manipulation superiority that had dominated galactic combat sports for generations. Her species controlled reality itself, treating spacetime like malleable material that could be reshaped according to tactical requirements. Against most opponents, victory was achieved before combat officially commenced. Against Riley, her dimensional manipulation encountered something unprecedented and deeply unsettling. Human cognitive patterns, it turned out, were remarkably resistant to reality-based attacks. Not because of supernatural defenses or technological protection, but because human perception processed multiple parallel probability streams simultaneously while maintaining operational coherence across contradictory sensory inputs. Worse, Riley's mind seemed to be actively calculating dimensional mechanics while simultaneously analyzing Velnara's physical positioning and cataloging micro-expressions that revealed intended reality manipulations before they were implemented. She wasn't just fighting within altered reality. She was treating dimensional manipulation as another environmental variable to be analyzed and optimized around. The match lasted exactly 93 seconds. Riley's victory came not through overpowering Velnara's reality control, but by operating within a tactical framework that rendered dimensional advantages irrelevant. She moved through attack sequences that exploited the microsecond delays between dimensional perception and physical implementation. Her strikes targeted nerve clusters that disrupted psychic concentration required for reality manipulation. By the time Velnara realized, she was facing someone who treated dimensional mechanics as merely another physics problem to be solved rather than an insurmountable supernatural advantage. Optimal positioning for finishing techniques had already been achieved. Impossible, Velnara whispered as medical technicians assisted her exit from the arena. She was calculating 17 different probability matrices simultaneously while implementing counter-strategies for each potential outcome. Kexnal reviewed the combat recordings with mounting existential dread. The human's victory hadn't relied on supernatural abilities or superior technology. Instead, she had demonstrated something that might have been considerably more dangerous: absolute tactical adaptability combined with pattern recognition capabilities that effectively treated the supernatural as merely another category of natural phenomenon to be systematically analyzed and countered. The championship match would pit Riley against the Academy's legendary undefeated champion, Torvak the Unconquerable, whose species had evolved in the gravitational maelstrom surrounding galactic core black holes. As the combatants entered the arena, Kexnal found himself questioning every assumption about combat effectiveness and species capabilities that had shaped his entire career. Final assessment protocols are now active, he announced to the assembled observers, his voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. Contestants will demonstrate maximum combat effectiveness within Academy safety parameters. No techniques that risk station structural integrity. No abilities that might cause dimensional cascade failures, and no. He paused, looking directly at Riley with growing apprehension. No holding back of species-typical capabilities. The human's expression remained neutrally professional, but something in her posture shifted with mechanical precision. That predatory calculation he had noticed during initial intake seemed to intensify exponentially, as if some internal limitation system had just received authorization to disengage safety protocols. "You're certain about that no holding back specification?" she asked with conversational casualness that made several observers instinctively activate personal defense systems. The question carried implications that generated survival instinct responses across multiple species simultaneously. Kexnal realized with crystalline clarity that during Riley's entire Academy tenure, he had never witnessed her operating at what she considered optimal performance parameters. Every technique, every victory, every display of tactical brilliance had represented her equivalent of casual recreational activity. Demonstrate your species' maximum combat potential within established safety guidelines, he confirmed, though uncertainty began permeating his biometallic vocal harmonics. Riley nodded once, and the transformation was immediately visible to anyone with advanced threat assessment capabilities. Her casual demeanor evaporated, replaced by something that registered as fundamentally dangerous to every survival instinct in the arena. She began executing warm-up routines that resembled basic flexibility exercises but generated microvibrations through the deck, plating that suggested kinetic energy transfer capabilities beyond anything she had previously demonstrated. Fascinating. Torvak's gravitationally enhanced form pulsed with anticipation. The primitive finally reveals her actual nature. The championship match began with Torvak's standard opening strategy: immediate environmental control through gravitational field manipulation. Localized space-time distortions flowed across the arena like liquid nightmare, creating zones of altered physics and kinetic impossibility. Gravity weapons materialized in complex geometric patterns designed to restrict opponent mobility while establishing absolute tactical dominance through fundamental force control. For approximately 4 seconds, his strategy appeared devastatingly effective. Then Riley moved. What occurred next violated several Academy assumptions about human physical limitations and challenged fundamental understanding of how baseline biology could interact with supernatural phenomena. She didn't avoid the gravitational attacks. She analyzed their force vectors in real time and identified movement corridors that exploited mathematical inconsistencies in Torvak's field generation matrix. Her speed remained within documented human parameters, but her efficiency of motion eliminated every wasted calorie of energy expenditure, creating an effect that resembled teleportation through pure optimization. More disturbing was her tactical approach to gravitational manipulation. Rather than treating localized spacetime distortion as an overwhelming supernatural force to be endured, she processed it as an advanced physics problem with exploitable mathematical parameters. Gravity weapons required specific geometric configurations to maintain field coherence. Force distortions followed predictable calculation patterns. Everything operated according to natural laws, and natural laws meant systematic vulnerabilities that could be identified and exploited. 60 seconds into the match, Riley had identified optimal countermeasures to every technique in Torvak's arsenal. 120 seconds in, she was systematically dismantling his gravitational constructs by targeting their mathematical foundation points with precision that suggested she was performing complex physics calculations while simultaneously implementing dynamic combat strategies. 180 seconds in, she had maneuvered him into arena positions where his most devastating attacks became geometrically impossible due to environmental interference patterns. At the 4-minute mark, she achieved what combat analysts later classified as textbook apex predator immobilization through techniques that belonged in xenobiology research papers rather than military combat demonstrations. Torvak yielded. The arena fell silent except for the humming of life support systems and Riley's controlled breathing returning to baseline parameters. She surveyed the assembled observers with the expression of someone who had planned and just completed routine equipment calibration rather than demonstrating combat capabilities that fundamentally altered Academy understanding of her entire species' potential. Was that demonstration sufficient? She asked with professional courtesy. Kexnall stared at her with the dawning comprehension that every assumption about human limitations had been not merely wrong, but catastrophically, dangerously wrong. The primitive species from Earth had just demonstrated tactical sophistication that rendered most galactic military doctrines obsolete, while operating within safety parameters that suggested even greater capabilities held in reserve. Your entire Academy tenure, he said with growing horror, you were deliberately holding back. Yes. Why? Riley considered the question with the same methodical, analytical approach she applied to combat problem solving. Because the Academy maintained specific regulations about not permanently damaging fellow students, not destabilizing local stellar phenomena, and not demonstrating techniques that might precipitate diplomatic incidents. Compliance with those regulations required moderation. Moderation. Humans are persistence predators, she explained with matter-of-fact professionalism that made the statement somehow more terrifying. We evolved to pursue prey across continental distances until it collapsed from exhaustion, then systematically process it for maximum resource extraction. Our combat methodology reflects that evolutionary background. What you've been observing represents me operating within parameters that wouldn't accidentally traumatize fellow students or destabilize local political relationships. The implications of her statement propagated through the assembled observers like gravitational shock waves through spacetime itself. Every major galactic power maintained diplomatic and military relationships with Earth based on assumptions about human combat capabilities derived from primitive kinetic weapons and chemical explosive systems. None of them had considered that those apparent limitations might represent deliberate restraint rather than technological inadequacy. The projectile weapons, Kexnall whispered as pieces of a cosmic puzzle, fell into terrifying alignment. The primitive tactics, the chemical explosives. Your species deliberately appears less threatening than your actual capabilities. We discovered early that displaying our full potential tends to make other species extremely nervous. Riley acknowledged. Galactic civilization functions more smoothly when everyone assumes humans are just unusually persistent agriculturalists with loud weapons and questionable fashion sense. Dean Constructor Nexith's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been existential panic. How much were you holding back during this demonstration? Riley's expression suggested she was performing calculations involving variables that most conscious beings preferred not to contemplate. In terms of actual combat optimization, today's championship match represented approximately 15% of theoretical maximum efficiency. The Academy's combat assessment protocols, designed to evaluate supernatural abilities across hundreds of species, possessed no classification framework for beings who achieved functionally superhuman effectiveness through pure tactical sophistication and systematic optimization. Riley had demonstrated that with sufficient pattern recognition and methodical analysis, conventional physics could be weaponized more efficiently than most supernatural powers. Your final assessment classification, Kexnall announced after frantic consultation with increasingly panicked senior command staff, Island. Academically unprecedented. Riley nodded, as if this outcome had been statistically inevitable, which it probably had been from the moment she decided to operate within Academy safety parameters rather than optimal efficiency specifications. Around the arena, representatives from major galactic powers were already composing urgent diplomatic communications that would fundamentally restructure humanity's position in interstellar politics and military planning. Will there be advanced coursework opportunities? She inquired with professional interest. Advanced coursework? Kexnall's mandibles clicked in patterns, indicating impending psychological collapse. You've just demonstrated combat capabilities that make most established galactic military strategies obsolete. What possible advanced instruction could we provide? Comprehensive xenobiology studies, Riley replied promptly. I've only acquired direct analytical experience with approximately 53 species during my Academy tenure. The galaxy contains thousands more, and I haven't systematically analyzed their tactical vulnerabilities, optimal incapacitation methods, or resource extraction potentials yet. The silence that followed her statement was interrupted only by the sound of multiple observers discreetly activating emergency evacuation protocols. And so the Academy learned that the most dangerous predators in the galaxy were sometimes the ones who politely asked permission before demonstrating their actual capabilities, especially when they had been consciously operating within safety limitations for the benefit of interspecies diplomatic relations. The Human Exchange Program was immediately classified at security levels, typically reserved for weaponized stellar engineering projects, and galactic military protocols were hastily revised to accommodate the disturbing reality that Earth's inhabitants had been deliberately restraining themselves during every previous interstellar interaction. Riley returned to her quarters with the professional satisfaction of objectives accomplished and began planning her advanced studies curriculum. After all, the galaxy contained numerous species she hadn't properly analyzed yet, and humans were nothing if not thorough, in their systematic approach to comprehensive optimization projects. The Academy's motto remained excellence through superior destruction, but administrative staff quietly added a classified addendum noting that some forms of excellence were perhaps too superior for general circulation among species who preferred their nightmares to remain safely fictional.